Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to take a look at the overall image quality from the new premium series from Samyang / Rokinon. And this is the 14mm f2.4 lens in that series. So here in the Rokinon, it is the SP 14mm f2.4. And so we're going to take a look at some of the key metrics for a lens like this, a wide-angle lens with a bright maximum aperture. Obviously a lens that a lot of people are going to use either for landscapes, potentially for architecture, and also potentially for shooting things like astrophotography. So let's see how the lens holds up for those kinds of things. We're going to jump in and look at some real-world images along with some tests and see how it holds up. All right, we're going to jump in and start by examining the overall resolution from the lens. So starting looking at f2.4. Now, I want to note a couple of quirks here. Actually, I had, for this comparison, I had both lenses mounted on a Sony a7R II while I had it on hand, just to get that extra bit of resolution over the 5D Mark IV I typically use. For whatever reason on the Sony, you'll see that it registers as f2.2 is the maximum aperture, while on the Canon 5D Mark IV, it actually registers as f2.5. The reality is, of course, is that the physical aperture is not changing in either situation, so you're not getting f2.2, neither are you getting f2.5, you are getting f2.4. That's the actual size of the aperture. The other thing to note here on just on a global level, if we look at this image, is that the vignette here is quite heavy at f2.4, and so basically it takes, if I were to manually correct for this vignette, which I've done here, it takes pretty much the maximum value in terms of the manual adjustment. So I'm adding up 100 and then moving the midpoint over a fair bit to completely eliminate that. But as you can see, I mean, you are able to completely eliminate it, and you know, I'm not seeing too much of an addition of noise here on the A7R II body. But anyway, we'll go back to just the basic image here. And so the other thing you can see from this is that we'll see, particularly when we put it next to the Tamron, that there is a little bit more of a greenish color tint to this one as opposed to what I consider the more neutral color rendering of the Tamron. I've seen this actually with a number of newer lenses, and you know, in real world shooting it looks fine. It's just you kind of notice it more when you're comparing it with some that are a little more neutral. So here at f2.4, you can see going right out to the edge of the frame here, where the plane of focus is, that there's actually great resolution right out to the edge of the frame. That's incredibly impressive right there for the edge of a 42 megapixel frame at f2.4. And moving here past this tree, we see that that's great. So of course focused here on this cathedral itself, as you can see, even at f2.4, there's lots of contrast, detail, no real haze here. I mean, there's just nothing really to complain about there in terms of the overall resolution. On this side of the frame, we're going out of the plane of focus, and so you can't really evaluate the depth of field or the sharpness there, but just note that across the frame, we're able to get incredible amount of detail here overall. Okay, so now if we put the Tamron next to it, both of these lenses now at f2.8, and so we get an apples to apples comparison. A couple of things to note. Of course, at 14 millimeters, the Rokinon frame's a little bit wider, as you can see, than the 15 millimeters on the Tamron. However, for those of you that are watching carefully, you'll note that the new Rokinon 14 millimeter in the SP line actually isn't quite as wide as just the basic Rokinon 14mm f2.8, and even in the specifications the angle of view is not quite as wide. However, obviously this is still a very wide angle here, but as you can see, it is framing wider than what the Tamron is, but it's not remarkably so. Another thing to note here is that for field use, the Tamron has very, very low vignette for a wide-angle lens, and that's one of the great strengths of it. And so even stop down a little bit here, the Rokinon has very obviously heavier vignette by comparison. Now, if we jump over to the side of the frame, See that both of these lenses, are looking pretty good overall. However, there is a clear difference in texture information here, and even looking at this tree, we can see that the Rokinon is just delivering a sharper image towards the edge of the frame. One other thing I want to note is that even we saw at f2.4 in this transition area, point of very high contrast, you're not seeing any chromatic aberration at all here, and I've not attempted to correct for it. It's just doing a great job here, and so a very impressive performance there. You can see that the Tamron, by comparison, does have some lateral chromatic aberration. It has very little true, longitudinal chromatic aberration, kind of the more traditional towards the center of the frame, but on the edges of the frame it does exhibit the lateral chromatic aberrations that don't really disappear as you stop the lens down. So just looking at that, we can see that there's definitely an improvement for the Rokinon there. Now, if we look towards the center of the frame here in terms of overall sharpness, we're going to find that here you can see that the Tamron does very well towards the center of the frame. I've compared it with a lot of newer lenses recently, and it continues to hold up very, very well. And so I would say that there may be a minute edge for the Tamron, but they're really so close that it's nearly indistinguishable. And that's in the center, of course, but when you consider that the Rokinon, it kind of extends that out towards the edge, and without the chromatic aberration, I think that it's pretty safe to say that the very minor edge for the Tamron in the center of the frame kind of balances out when we look at the global image overall. The other thing that I noted previously is you can see quite a difference in the color rendering here, with I think the Tamron delivering a little bit more neutral, just slightly cooler overall, but maybe a little bit more neutral color rendering. However, in real world shooting, I was very happy with the color rendition from the Rokinon lens. Now, if we stop both lenses down to f5.6 here, we're going to see that, Tamron is showing no vignette at this point, and there's just a hint of it here. You can see it towards the very edges, and so not quite fully eliminated yet. Not really until about f8 is it fully eliminated. So here we see, actually surprisingly, that the Tamron, for whatever reason, it doesn't look hardly any better here towards the edge of the frame than it did at f2.8. Meanwhile, the depth of field is increased, and so the overall sharpness here is just looking even better on the Rokinon. The other thing, of course, is that those, as I mentioned previously, those lateral chromatic aberrations don't really fully clear up even when you stop the lens down. That's just the nature of the aberration. And so you can see just a cleaner looking result here from the Rokinon lens, and now its resolution in texture is just popping all the more. And so moving towards the center of the frame, we see that, once again, things are pretty much equal here at the center of the frame. It's hard to declare one a winner over the other. And as we kind of look across here, we can see that as we get out towards the edges of the frame, the Rokinon is once again showing its overall performance there, consistency. A quick look at f8. Now, I think we have pretty much all the vignette cleared up here. There may be just the slightest hint there. That's certainly an optical weakness for it overall. Stop down here to f8. I would say that the Tamron's looking a little bit better over here, but obviously look at the f150 there. It's clearly superior on the Rokinon lens, and so overall, of course, still a little bit of that lateral chromatic aberration that's there. And so anyway, looking towards the center of the frame, they're roughly equal here once again. But if you consider the sum total, I'm going to say that overall, I think the Rokinon is delivering the more consistent performance. Now, if we move on towards looking at distortion, we're going to find here that there certainly is some barrel distortion that's exhibited. And here we have some lines, of course, that should be straight in this door frame. I was shooting at the Chateau Montebello in Quebec, and so you can see here that there are some curves here. It's important to note that at this stage when I'm doing the review, there is no profile correction as of yet for Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw. And so I'm just doing manual corrections. And so just inputting a value of 9 in terms of the distortion correction, we can see that that's eliminated a lot of that curve. And if you want to take it a step further, I've done kind of a guided upright, And so here we can get the lines, you know, very, very straight as a part of that. And so because you have such a wide angle of view, and if you have enough room in doing an interior space, you can correct and get a very clean finished result. Obviously, it's not going to be a replacement for a tilt shift type lens for getting great lines for architectural work, but if architectural work is not your full-time gig and you just want to do it periodically, I think you can make this lens work for that. Here's another example here. Now this is actually a panorama of 3 images, and so we're getting some curving stretch here towards the edges of the frame. This is again at the Chateau Montebello, and I'm looking at the interior space. This is an incredible building, and so I had a great time shooting there. Now here I actually went with 3 or 4 vertical images, and I combined them together, and I actually like this. There's no distortion correction that's been done here. I actually like the result here, which I think you know, looks actually pretty fantastic to me overall. And so if you know, that's another consideration, is the way that you shoot. You may be able to get better results that way. By the way, this incredible fireplace in the center of this is an 80-foot tall fireplace that weighs around 80 tons. Just incredible. Here's another look. This is also at the Chateau Montebello in another one of their buildings here. And by the way, if you're interested in seeing more of these photos, I wrote an article about the Chateau Montebello that you can find on my website as a part of that. But you can see if we look down here towards this part of the frame that there is some curvature that's taking place. And so here, and you can see just, you know, along here, we've got a bit of a bow there in the center. All I did is I then input that value of 9 into the just manual distortion correction, and you know, I think we've got a fully usable result that came out of that. And so anyway, you know, it's workable for architectural work. Now, as we look at flare resistance here, this is at f2.4, and so we can see that you know, contrast has held up pretty well. I'm not seeing really any kind of prismatic haze so much around this area, so there's not really any veiling that I see. Contrast is held up. You can see down here that there is a bit of a ghosting pattern that is seen, and so overall I don't really know how fantastic my focus was for this, a little bit front focused, but anyway, you get the impression there. Stopping the lens down to f11, we can see that there are now a little bit more ghosting artifacts that have come out. Also quite a gorgeous sunburst or sun star there. That's a real plus. The previous generation 14mm f2.8 lens, it produced really bland, kind of ugly sun stars, so this is a huge step up. We can see also that our ghost pattern down here is a little bit more defined, but at the same time, if you're careful with how you position this, I think that you're going to end up with a result that is certainly workable. So for having that curved front element, this is really not a bad performance. Now here we can see that I put the sun just barely at the edge of the frame, and so I did get a bit of a ghosting, but as you can see, just a very minor, I'll toggle back and forth, a very minor recomposition, and I completely eliminated that. All I've got is just a little bit of shafts of light coming into the frame, and of course contrast looks fantastic. And so I think that if you're just careful at how you position, you're going to get great results. This is obviously not going to be a bokeh type lens per se, but here I just wanted to shoot somewhere close to minimum focus. We can see, of course, the nice rounded aperture blade, so nothing looks weird there. And of course, the amazing thing is just look how much detail is on that leaf that is on our plane of focus. Really an impressive optical result overall. Now here's the part you may have been waiting for. We're going to look at the Coma performance overall. So this is wide open, and as you can see, star points look nice and crisp. And so as we look towards out here towards the edge of the frame, this is really a very impressive result. So towards the very edge of the frame, we're getting a little bit of maybe distortion stretching, but as far as Coma, I'm not seeing any tails or wings being formed on these star points. It really is a fantastic performance. Already the previous generation f2.8 lens was good, but this is better. It is delivering a fantastic performance. And here's just one that I've given a little bit more processing to, and once again you can see that if you kind of process to make the star points pop even more, you're getting just a tremendously crisp, great looking result from the lens. And so I would say that this, outside of the vignette, is probably the new top performer that I'm aware of for shooting the night sky. So as you can see on the image quality front, things are pretty encouraging here. Already Samyang's previous 14mm f2.8 lens was really quite a strong lens optically, particularly at its bargain price point. This lens isn't quite the bargain that one is, by a fairly good margin. But as we can see, it holds up very well, and one of the things that stands out in terms of the overall resolution is how consistently it resolves across the frame. Another thing, of course, that is very important is that it manages to have very low chromatic aberrations, and then to avoid the lateral chromatic aberration that, for example, the Tamron exhibits. Probably the greatest optical defect is the fact that it continues to have, like the 14mm f2.8 before it, it has quite a heavy vignette, and it takes a while for that vignette to clear up. Not really until f5.6 or even better at f8 does it really completely eliminate. However, vignetting is something that is fairly easy to deal with in post these days. However, while Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw just received new updates in the last 24 hours, I did note that so far there hasn't been a standard profile that's shown up for this particular lens yet, though I surmise that it is coming. The other thing that's going to be really important for those of you that are interested in shooting astrophotography is that this lens improves on the already excellent performance from the 14mm f2.8. It exhibits very, very low amounts of coma, and so the chromatic distortion is really well controlled, and so that makes it a very appealing night sky shooting kind of lens because of the bright aperture, and of course having a very sharp resolution combined with very low coma. Makes it really perhaps one of the best astrophotography lenses that I've seen, period, to this point. The only thing really that I would consider a detriment for that kind of work is the fairly heavy vignette, and the one reason that a person might consider a lens like the Tamron 15-30 f2.8 VC over this lens is that is an area of strength for the Tamron. It has a bit more coma than what this lens does, but it has very low vignette for a wide-angle lens. And so, kind of different strokes for different folks, but certainly two worthy alternatives to consider. When it comes to the distortion department, it definitely has some barrel distortion, but as we were able to see in some of the architectural shots that I took, it's actually not all that difficult to correct for, and definitely not a very complex distortion pattern, and so that's also what I would perceive as a positive there. Finally, when it comes to the flare resistance, we saw that the lens does exhibit some flare and some ghosting when the sun is in the frame. However, there is very little loss of contrast, and it's certainly not the worst ghosting performance that I've seen. And we saw that if you're careful with how you just kind of set the sun, even if it's just right outside the frame, you can really eliminate any kind of artifacting at all. And if you put the sun in the frame, if you just position it correctly, you should be okay. Finally, the 9 aperture blades, they produce a very nice sunburst when the lens is stopped down. So overall, the image quality is pretty fantastic from the lens. Very little to criticize overall. I mean, a little bit of distortion and definitely some vignette, but beyond that, it optically is producing extremely, extremely well. And so if you are considering this lens, I saw nothing in my test there that should make you kind of second guess your choice to acquire it. I'm Dustin Abbott. If you look in the link down below, you can see even more images in the image gallery I've got going, and expect me to follow up with a final verdict in about a week or so. If you haven't already signed up for my newsletter, please do so. You can follow me on social media, and of course, you can click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Thanks for watching today. Have a great day.